where in your life do you have ease or confidence or patience or joy?
Yeah.
What does that feel like? What's the experience of that? Okay, how do you apply that experience? How do you bring that experience? How do you practice a posture of joy, a facial expression of joy, of the breath of joy, or of ease, or of confidence? And how do you practice that when you don't need it? And then you get up on the stage and you're speaking to 5,000 people, and that confidence is there. It's available to you. It is embodied.
Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Greene, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change.
All right. Well, I am very pleased and honored to be sitting down today with Dr. Amanda Blake. And I know Mandy a little bit personally through a couple of intersections, but I mostly know her through some of her work, her book, and some of her online presence. So, but in a brief introduction, Dr. Amanda Blake is the author of Your Body is Your Brain and the creator of the popular Body Equals Brain course on the neurobiology of experiential learning. By the way, that Your Body is Your Brain is an excellent primer in basically the neurobiology of being a human. So it's a book I've recommended a lot. And in addition to being an author and a teacher, she works with as a coach and works with progressive leaders worldwide to help them become their best selves, enjoy life more, and make a bigger contribution. Mandy is a master somatic leadership coach and holds a degree in biology, human biology from Stanford University. And her PhD is in leadership and management from Case Western Reserve, where she is a esteemed Fetzer Scholar and a research fellow at the Fowler Center for Business, and as an agent of world benefit. So, so that's just a brief professional introduction. And just as a short sort of aside, Mandy, where you and I first connected was at a Zen leadership program. And I think were you on location in Spring Green, Wisconsin?
Yeah.
For the Institute of Zen Leadership that Ginny Whitelaw runs, and you came for a program. So that was where I think we first connected.
I think so. And yeah, I remember that fondly. I think you're the person that introduced me to the TRE work and, some of the kind of potential for trauma release from that perspective. So I don't know if your listeners will be familiar with that, but
they'll definitely be familiar with TRE. Yeah, that's been a pretty frequent theme through the podcast. Yeah. So so since that meeting, that was probably around 2016 or so. That was sort of before the publication of did your book come out in 2018 or 2017?
2018, and just recently an audiobook. So
nice.
Good for listeners of podcasts to finally, after many, many, many requests, we finally got it out in audio. So I am really excited and proud about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. So in terms of what we're going to cover and talk about today, basically, I want to hear a little bit about, we're going to talk for sure about Mandy's book and her related course, the Body Equals Brain course. And something I'm excited to talk about is her research. She did some very interesting doctoral research on the topic of embodied self-awareness and in a coaching context. So we're going to hear a little bit about that. I hope we can hear a bit about your personal story that led you into this work. What else are we going to hope to talk about? Also, maybe just kind of other things about where you're headed. And I also would like to include some about your particular sort of lineage of coaching that you've been immersed in for a few decades, a lot through the Strozzi style of somatic coaching, but perhaps there's other lineages that would be good to kind of bring in. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the distinctions between psychotherapy and somatic coaching, some of the overlap and some of the different frameworks. So that's at least a little bit of what I hope we talk through today.
It sounds great. And I'm so excited, Alex, to have reconnected with you and have the opportunity to have this conversation. I think it's going to be really rich. So we'll just see where we go. You let me know what you wanted to
All
say.
right. Awesome. Here we go. Off we journey. So let's start with a little bit of maybe just total, background. I saw a little bit in your website and, some of but I'd rather hear it fresh from you. You were interested in biology, you studied there. Give us a little bit of how you got so curious about the body and then later the connection of the body to the human being.
Yeah, I'll try and do it in a nutshell. It's kind of like a really, in my experience of it, it seemed to take a really long time. Like, I'm not a person who stepped into adulthood and knew what I wanted to do and when did it. It really took a long time. And in some way, like, from where I sit now, I can actually look all the way back into my childhood and go, oh yeah, I used to read age-appropriate books about, pregnancy and childbirth when my mom was pregnant with my brother, right? Like, I was into it. I was like, wow, the human body, so fascinating, so amazing.
Right.
And I also used to read books for kids that were about psychology and feelings and, warm fuzzies and cold pricklies. Some people might remember TA for Tots, right? Like I was just very interested, even as a child, in what does it mean to be human, and what is this thing called life that we're all floating around in? And as a 5-year-old, that looks really different from how it looks today, but it's sort of an interest that's been with me all my life. And then the other thing I'd say is partly because I grew up in a medical family, partly because I grew up as an athlete, I went into college thinking I would go into sports medicine.
Okay.
And when I discovered the human biology degree at Stanford, it's actually I just thank my stars every day that I sort of stumbled into this amazing degree program that is incredibly interdisciplinary and really takes a look at the human being. Like, the basic premise is that you can't understand humans without looking through the lens of both the natural and the social sciences. So coming up as this kid who was an athlete in a medical family, interested in biology and psychology, even though I wouldn't have called it that, right? And I stumble into college and I'm like, wow, I can study those two things at once. And then I also did a lot around, in that same major, around how culture and nature influence each other. So it's fundamentally the same set of questions, but in communities of individuals rather than individuals alone.
Right.
And so that was my academic background, and I found that it equipped me for no specific job at all. And I was a little bit adrift. I took a tour of duty in education, which was very interesting to me. I did a lot of teaching early in my career. I took a tour of duty in software development because I grew up in Silicon Valley, so you kind of have to for a little while.
Right.
Great. Learned lots of good things about business. Ultimately, I landed in coaching.
Right.
And that seemed like a pretty right fit, but I had reservations and uncertainties until I landed in a somatic approach to coaching. And both from my experience as a learner and my experience as a person who was transforming myself through somatic practice, through embodied practice, through contextualized movement practices. That was very profound for me, even as an athlete, even as a meditator, even as a person who had done yoga for many years.
Sure.
I found that very transformative. And all of a sudden, and finally, after, a decade of searching, I was like, oh, this is where all my academic studies apply to, right? This major that I had such a good time in, that was so sort of, well, this is the major that's about everything. I was like, great, I can apply all of that to what I'm doing here.
Right.
So I finally kind of like settled in and found a place that I felt I could call home in my career. It didn't come without some skepticism, I will say. So that's a lot of the impetus for the book was, on the one hand, my life was being transformed. I was being transformed by a variety of practices that I was in. On the other hand, I was like, this shouldn't work. Like, why does, dropping my chin make me more confident in my professional life, right? Or why does feeling my feet on the floor actually make me, speak up more readily than I used to?
Right.
So it didn't make sense to me. I wanted to go figure it out. I had an academic background to go figure it out.
Yeah.
Eventually that became a book, a course, and so on. So I just told you I couldn't fit it in a nutshell, but that's the story.
No, but that's a pretty good nutshell. Well, I have a question, because when I was reviewing your book, and first of all, regarding the human biology degree, yeah, I feel like I haven't heard that. I mean, in biology, bio major, biomed, pre-med, you hear about it, but in terms of human biology, I hadn't heard that as a major. So that sounds unique in and of itself. But I think I saw somewhere in your book an acknowledgement to Robert Sapolsky, who has been kind of a hero of mine, a well-known author. The book that I first landed on was what is it? Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers? Is that the title? Yeah. But so he's a Stanford professor. So did you work with him? Was he one of your professors?
Yeah. So Robert Sapolsky and a guy named Bill Durham taught the core program, and they co-taught it.
Right.
From really looking at from the standpoint of Sapolsky held down kind of the biology, psychology piece. Durham held down kind of the cultural anthropology and ecology piece. And we worked with both of them for a year. So I had a full year with each of these really incredible thinkers. Right. And then many years later, I actually went back to talk to Robert Sapolsky. I emailed him and I said, look, I've stumbled my way into this really interesting niche field of embodied leadership coaching. And I really am thinking that I would like to do a PhD to study the intersection of neurobiology and somatic learning and leadership.
Right.
And I was sitting there in his office saying, this is what I'm interested in. I haven't landed on a program. Like, do you have any recommendations? What do you think I should do?
Sure.
He said, don't bother with a PhD, just go write the book. Mm. And I was like, oh, okay. Permission granted. Mm. So, and I was already thinking at that point about writing a book, but I felt like, well, I don't really have my driver's license yet, right? Like, I shouldn't really, who am I to say anything about this? And he said, no, go write the book. And so that gave me a lot of fuel for Your Body's Your Brain and doing a lot of the research around that. I did all of that prior to entering a PhD program, an idea that I had abandoned.
Right.
Until I met my now colleague and another really important mentor in my life, Richard Boyatzis, who's author of Primal Leadership and Resonant Leadership and a number of other books about leadership.
Sure.
I was actually almost done writing Your Body is Your Brain.
Yep.
I had the whole manuscript printed out. He and I were both speaking at a conference. And I got in touch with him beforehand and I said, hey, can I pull you aside at this conference, take you to coffee and just show you what I'm working on, and you can tell me if I'm going to embarrass myself before I publish this. Mm-hmm. He graciously said yes. We sat down. We just had a blast having a cup of coffee. Yeah. I showed him sort of the central model of the book. I sort of had the manuscript in front of me, put it in front of him. He said, I think this looks fantastic. And by the way, you should come study with me. And I was like, okay, tell me more.
Right.
And I wasn't aware of this, but there's a wonderful program at Case Western Reserve that is specifically built for mid-career doctoral students that want to learn to do research at a very high level. Yeah. And he asked me to come study with him, and he was my committee chair on my dissertation, and really guided me through the process of the research that we'll probably talk about today. So
great.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Well, just a last note on Sapolsky. So big hero. Well, actually, I'm wondering if you got to go to Africa with him.
Oh, I wish. No.
An impressive part of his work. No, but he's on my shit list right now because I am not feeling his latest work. Determined. I have some resistance. So
well, I have enough resistance even to the title that I haven't cracked it open yet.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you've at least read a New York Times article or something. A bit hotly debated. Some big contentions. But anyway, we'll give him. We'll see where that lands.
We can learn from our mentors without having to agree with everything they have to say. And I have tremendous respect for him. Tremendous respect.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Very cool. Well, okay. So coming back to, you meandered a bit, post college, et cetera. And then somehow, leadership coaching, and it sort of, you had some skepticism, but somehow somatic coaching was speaking to you. You were surprised by some things, but you were compelled by it. And I'm guessing, although I don't know this for sure, I'm thinking that you did coaching and you were in that world for a period of time, possibly a long period of time before culminating in the book. Is that true? And can you share a little bit more about what kind of pulled you into that world and what that phase of your career was like?
Yeah, and so I was I was actually working in Silicon Valley at the time when I started to get into coaching.
Right.
And my work there I wasn't like actually building software, but I was working for, many listeners may have heard of the company Intuit. They do lots of financial software. And I was doing business education for the people that used that software and building business education into that software. So I was already kind of on this. I had done some things in education for young people. I had done some outdoor kind of leadership oriented training. I'd done this business education work, and I was finding my way into coaching in the early 2000s, so maybe 2001, and starting to feel like, there are things here that make sense to me.
Okay.
And for anyone who was around the coaching world at that time, there were also things there that didn't make sense to me, that I felt were like not representative of who I wanted to be as a professional in the world.
Okay.
But the field has really matured and it has become more evidence-based. And I was always very, very interested in what's the evidence basis for coaching. How is it that when we're helping people and supporting people, not necessarily in a psychotherapeutic healing oriented way, but a growthful way that is, psychologically relevant. Right. Like, how do we know that it works? How do we know what works? So I was always very interested in the evidence basis. And I was probably doing that for at least 5 years before I got exposed to more embodied ways of coaching. And that first happened through a place called Strozzi Institute, which I know you have heard of. I don't know if your listeners will have heard of Strozzi Institute.
But yeah, give it a little bit of a...
Yeah, so for me, I actually got to Strozzi Institute because somebody handed me one of Richard Strozzi Heckler's books, another wonderful mentor in my life, a man who took his experience in martial arts and his experience as a psychotherapist and really married the movement practices of martial arts with psychotherapy as a path of personal growth.
Sure.
And he got very interested in leadership and started taking that work into more and more leadership spaces. So I started to intersect with that through a book that someone gave me. I came into that world. I did quite a bit of study and work at Strozzi Institute for a period of time. Right. And since then, I've also had many other teachers and mentors. So done lots of work with Ginny Whitelove Institute for Zen Leadership, who you have mentioned already and who you and I both know, Wendy Palmer, who until her recent passing ran an organization called Leadership Embodiment. So Wendy and her daughter Tiffany have brought a lot of really wonderful learning and lessons into my life. Arowana Hayashi, who I have followed a little bit less and have had less exposure to just due to time, but I love her marriage of theater and meditation. So there have been a number of places. And then, of course, there's the whole world of somatic experiencing and Hakomi and sensory motor psychotherapy. I play less there because I'm not a psychotherapist, and I really wanted to draw the line pretty clearly for myself in terms of what I offer. And this is about leadership development. This is about coaching. This is about present and future moment looking. And so I've been very explicit about not getting trained in domains that I don't specifically work in.
Sure.
But having said that, I mean, you can see behind me, listeners won't be able to, but like I've got if it's been written down and it's about somatics and embodiment, it is on that book behind me.
Yeah.
So, I've read a lot of Pierre Levine. I've heard him speak in various places. I wouldn't say that he's been a close teacher of mine, but I've benefited from so much of the work and exploration that he's done at Van der Kolk and so on.
Yeah, wonderful. So in that phase, sort of, so I'm hearing the mentors and within the embodied coaching world and leadership development world. What was your practice like at that time? Were you more of a were you a one-on-one sort of coach? Were you a person who worked with teams? What was sort of your application, prior to becoming an author and an educator? But maybe you're still doing a lot of coaching now. I'm not sure. But who was you? But before the book, who were you serving?
Yeah, I do a smaller amount of coaching now and a lot more teaching. But at the time, I was doing a lot of one-on-one coaching, mostly with people who were in positions of leadership inside of organizations that were trying to do something to do with ecological sustainability. So Nike has a big ecological sustainability program. I worked with some of the people there at that time.
Yeah.
I worked with some nonprofits that were in that space. And it was a mix, I would say, primarily one-on-one coaching and some team training more than team coaching.
Okay.
But team training around using embodied practice around how do you find resilience? How do you be kind of smarter in an embodied way in difficult conversations? How do you stand up for what your team might need at work, for example? So I was doing a lot of that kind of work when I was formulating the ideas for the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very cool. Well, so I guess then coming into the book itself, you shared a bit about, getting the permission, not that you necessarily needed it, but you got that permission or that nudge from Robert Sapolsky. Yeah. But what were some of the pieces coming together? I mean, it sounded like, your own curiosity around, what's known, what's the evidence base for these practices that you've been a part of. So that sounds like one thread, but what are the different forces that were coming together that made you feel like you wanted to put this project together?
Well, I think there were a few different things. So one was, yes, my own curiosity, but also like a need to answer my own skepticism.
Okay.
Right? The intellectual part of me that was hanging back and going, okay, I've had an experience that this makes a difference in my life, but I also don't buy it. Right? Like there was a part of me that's like, this is all a bunch of woo-woo. Can I curse on your podcast?
Oh yeah, please do.
All a bunch of woo-woo bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't buy it. And so there was a significant chunk of me that was kind of, I'm going to say, intellectually snobbish, right? I'm an intellectual snob.
Yep.
It was like, but none of this makes any sense. So I really wanted to figure that out for myself, right? That was one sort of driving, I would say, almost hunger or thirst.
Okay.
At the same time, like very much in parallel with that, because I was changing as a result of engaging in regular, embodied, I would say, leadership-oriented practice.
Okay.
And the ways that I was changing were really profound, right? Like I was able to, in workplace situations, speak up when I would have previously stayed quiet. And I could see that happen over a period of months with a specific individual where I was staying quiet and I learned to speak up.
Yep.
Similar in my intimate partnering relationships where I was able to speak up in places where I would have normally stayed quiet.
Yep.
I was able to take risks on behalf of what I care about more. So whether that, again, is like speaking up at some, let's call it a networking event, or, or take a swing from a business standpoint, like I'm going to try something that I haven't tried before. So there were a number of ways where I got better at the things that were important to me in life. And while that was going on, I kept just feeling like people don't know this is available to them. Mm. And if they're anything like me, they're going to call bullshit before they even get a chance to try it out or to experience it or to see what's going on. Yeah. So I needed to answer like my own skeptical intellect, but I also knew there are a lot of other people out there like me that also are.
They need a bridge. They need a bridge to bring them into this world. If
there's a trustworthy bridge,
yeah,
then they're willing to walk across it and go, well, what's over here?
Right.
And I also knew from my own experience of watching with my own clients, like for anyone who's open enough to put themselves in the experience, usually their minds are blown. Usually they're like, whoa, I had no idea that I could get better at XYZ, right? Or, wow, I had no idea I was holding myself back in the following ways. And so I wanted people to have that. I wanted people to have the gifts that I had received. And so there was this combination of like, I need to answer this question myself. I think if I answer it, it will be helpful to other people.
Right.
Let me go find the answers.
I love that. For you regular listeners to the podcast, you know that about half of these episodes focus on TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I wanted to make sure that you know about the Redbeard TRE certification program, our educational platform to certify others. And we have both an online version of that I teach, as well as an in-person version of the training that my colleague Ellen McKenzie teaches in Madison, Wisconsin. My next online certification training is beginning August 3rd and 4th, 2024. That's the first of 3 modules. And the way the certification program works is it's about a 10 to 12 month program divided into 3 phases of learning, each with a weekend connected to it, and then some one-on-one work with me and people on my team to support your learning journey. TRE has been a life-changing modality for myself. It's open to people with any background. I wanted to make sure you know about the program. You can find more information at redbeardtre.com. Well, okay, so let's talk about the scaffolding of the book itself a little bit. So if one way to look at the book is it's sort of the book you would have wanted to read, maybe that's a way to think about it, to give a framework that was evidence-based, made sense, had an explanatory framework for, these embodiment practices that were showing up in these settings. Just in broad strokes, what's the layout of the book? And, there's a few details I want to touch upon, but let's just sort of start with the overview of it.
Yeah. Well, so I start the book really with an exploration of what is it? What are we even talking about here, right? Like, what is embodiment? Right. How does it work? How is this a form of our intelligence? And the first few chapters go through a story, a pretty dramatic story, actually, of someone making significant embodied change in their life. And then I talk about the neurobiology behind that. So how we develop what I call biobehavioral blind spots that get us stuck in habits and behaviors that actually don't get us what we want, whatever, fill in the blank, right? And so how we get in our own way, how we can get out of our own way by seeing those biobehavioral blind spots and starting to shift them. And then looking at just sort of like some really basic neurobiology head to toe, where a little bit about how learning happens, a little bit about different centers of intelligence. And then the bulk of the book is really about the process. So that's sort of the beginning that sets us up. And then the remainder of the book really talks about the process of how I kind of take different stories of many people. So a few of them are from my clients. Many of them are not my clients. There are people who've had these kinds of learnings and experiences and whose lives have been transformed by them. And I interviewed tons of people for the book. There's maybe 16 or 18 really major stories in there. And I tell these stories about how people came to embody different aspects of emotional and social intelligence. And I chose that framework because prior to writing the book, I kept seeing themes over and over about what was developing in me, in my colleagues, in my clients, right? And the themes that I kept seeing were things that fell into the description of emotional and social intelligence. Well, some listeners may know this, that our capacity for emotional and social intelligence, not only does it just improve our lives and make our lives better, it is one of the key markers of what sets apart outstanding leaders from average, what sets apart leaders who followers will say, I would work for that person again. I loved working for that person. And so I kept seeing these themes. They seemed really related. And I started to look more carefully at research that tied or related embodied learning to the development of emotional and social intelligence. Up until that point, most, I'll call it ESI for short, most ESI training is, someone talking at the front of a room with a bunch of PowerPoint slides. And that actually, it can make a difference. There's research that shows like it's a learnable set of skills and capacities. But since the research I've done, it's clear that makes a limited difference, not nearly as much as we would ideally love to see. And so, anyway, we were on how's the book? That's how the book is shaped
and scaffolded.
And let me say one other thing about that too, which is there's a primary set of concepts in the book that I lay out about the difference between the neurobiological difference between conceptual self-awareness and embodied self-awareness. And we can distinguish those neurobiologically. We understand they happen differently in the body and the brain, both involve the brain in our head and the neuromusculature of our body. But conceptual self-awareness actually relies on different neuroanatomy than embodied self-awareness. And embodied self-awareness is a fundamental, we've now discovered since publishing the book, it's a very fundamental underlying capacity that can increase all the skills of emotional and social intelligence when it's developed. So I'll just quickly define that term. Embodied self-awareness is fundamentally about present moment, right now, attention, non-judgmental attention. That's a little bit like a mindfulness orientation. To sensation, movement, and emotion. Sensation only happens right now in the present moment. We can't actually feel it in the past or in the future. And so that process of embodied self-awareness, coming present to our felt sense experience in the moment, turns out it has just a wealth of benefits. And I set out to write a book about leadership, but I say in the introduction, I failed because although there are many leadership examples in the book, the truth is we take our bodies with us wherever we go. So this also affects our parenting, and this also affects our studying in school if we're students. And this also affects, it just affects how we show up everywhere.
Yeah, that was sort of one of the things that stood out to me is that, as I reread it, and in preparation for this call, I reread basically the first third, and I was really struck again by how you sort of tee things up with that very powerful story of Brian Fippinger, sort of one example of somebody who had through somatic practices had a very transformative experience related to his own history with abuse and things like that. And what really struck me was how, on the one hand, you wrote a book about, a very fundamentally human experience, something that's definitely transcends any one activity like leadership or parenting, or, it's a human thing. And then you develop it into a framework, a growth model and a framework for growth. And I think the other thing that sort of stood out to me was on one level, using Brian's, that introductory piece, from one perspective, he went through a big shift and change, and you could look at some of what happened as if he had had a different life trajectory, he might never have worked through that content. He could have worked through it with a psychotherapist, maybe even a somatic, maybe a Hakomi or a sensory motor or a somatic experiencing psychotherapist might have been a different channel from which for him to create some, have some major shifts around his trauma history specifically. But what struck me in sort of your work is that it's really positioned within this idea of, well, what does human growth look like? And you're speaking to it right now around social and emotional intelligence, and how do these qualities start to emerge? And I think, again, coming back to Brian, something lucky for him is that, he had this big experience, and then it was also embedded in a context around where he was heading in life and capacities he was developing. And sometimes when I think about coaching and psychotherapy is phenomenal at the healing side of work. I mean, that's what it's built around. And it's sometimes very growth oriented as well. I think most psychotherapists would agree to that. But it's not necessarily the explicit emphasis about sort of where is somebody going apart from sort of healing at a psycho-emotional level. Where is that leading a person? So, but anyway, there was something about kind of the arc of how you put things together that made that really clear to me.
Oh, I'm glad. I hesitated to. I really asked myself, do I want to include a story about trauma in the book, and
right.
And do I want to start with that? Because this is actually not a book about trauma, and it's not a book about trauma healing. Although Brian, both through a process of somatic coaching, but also with the support of many other flavors of help and advisors, right, got through some very harrowing history in his own life,
right?
And for him, his pathway into it happened to be through a discovery of somatic coaching with the leadership orientation.
Sure.
Right. So there are these many different pathways, and one of the reasons that I used Brian's story right in the beginning, even though I was a little hesitant to include a story about trauma, is because his story is such a clear illustration of how when we shift ourselves from the inside in an embodied way,
right,
we actually literally see new possibilities. And in Brian's case, it happens that he recovered from, reversed
right,
a lifetime of colorblindness.
Right.
So he had seen, this, but I'm just saying for listeners,
right, of course,
read the book, right? Like like a lifetime of seeing in black and white, which is actually a very rare form of color blindness.
Right.
And that was reversed through embodied practice. He actually, all at once, all of a sudden, suddenly could see color when he couldn't before. And that sounds absolutely bizarre and like medically impossible, but there is such a thing as acquired color deficiency. That's what Brian had, and his color vision was completely restored to him. And the reason that I wanted to start with that story is twofold. One is I talk about these biobehavioral blind spots, and they are literally blind spots. We don't know we're seeing them.
That's what I liked about it too. You picked the most dramatic example, but useful, because then that concept, it's a very dramatic example of a biobehavioral blind spot. But it also then really, it makes you ask the question, okay, well, all right, well, what are my biobehavioral blind spots, and what are other examples? And so I really liked that. I liked that choice. I'd say a bold choice because it's such a strong story. But I think it then set up where you were going really well.
Well, I think so, because the reality is, in Brian's particular case, he was very forthcoming about the difficulties in his childhood, the difficulties with his first marriage, and really his he had this color blindness, but his biobehavioral blind spot was actually about intimacy. It was about whether intimacy was worthwhile. It was about whether intimacy was possible. It was about whether intimacy had held any interest to him. And he had developed a biobehavioral blind spot around intimacy with other human beings, where, as he describes it, I never let anyone in past the foyer. No one ever really knew the real me, and I wasn't going to let them, because that was risky, that was dangerous, right? And really wise biobehavioral choice, which we all make wise biobehavioral choices in a very automatic, non-conscious way.
Right.
And it's not because we're all traumatized. I actually don't buy into this current fashion of sort of every discomfort and slight is a source of trauma.
Sure.
I think that's not helpful for people who have experienced severe life circumstances, nor is it helpful for those who have experienced minor life circumstances, who really are capable of, we're all capable actually of a great deal of resilience, right? So I don't really buy into that approach. But on the other hand, we do all have biologically embedded habits of responsiveness to life that will set up blind spots for us.
Right.
And when we get to see what those are, and we discover them in part by working with people who know how to help us see them. But when we get to see what those are, and they're revealed to us for the very first time, it's like, oh, I didn't know that I held my jaw every time I'm impatient with my spouse. Mm-hmm. But it turns out that if I relax my jaw and relax my eyes, I can actually just be a little kinder in those moments of impatience. It doesn't necessarily change my spouse's behavior. It doesn't necessarily change my assessment of what they're doing. But boy, can I be more relaxed in that situation. And that really changes the dynamic between us in a really positive way, right? Just by relaxing my jaw and softening my eyes in a moment where I otherwise would have tensed up.
Right.
So we all have these biobehavioral blind spots, and when we can see them and then choose to do something different about them, that's where that growthful path is. That's where that orientation towards growth and development is. So I know you wanted to talk maybe a little bit about where's the overlap with psychotherapy, and maybe I've said about that. I'm not sure, but I want to pause here and see what you're thinking.
Yeah. No, I think we kind of mapped that a bit. I think we mapped that.
Yeah. I think what I would say is that the work that I do, at any rate, it's not trauma healing work.
Yeah.
Trauma could actually be healed along the way.
Sure.
So that's not the emphasis or the orientation. The orientation is where you headed in life, in your career, in what is it that you're envisioning, hoping for, building towards.
Yeah.
And then how do you unfold into the person that is fulfilling on that dream?
Right.
It is bringing that vision to reality, that is achieving those goals, right? And it is this process of unfolding, and part of that is revealing these blind spots and finding a different way to move with them.
Awesome. Can we talk a little bit about how you took the content and the framework laid out in the book? How do you, people can read your book and they can learn a ton. If they then work with you through your course, Body Equals Brain, well, what's that like? Well, how long is it? What's it like to take the actual course with you?
Yeah, well, that's actually undergoing a lot of change. So the story of the course was actually born out of the writing of the book.
Okay.
And I was writing this book, and I just thought, well, it's stupid to just write in my own little, cave and then throw something into the world. I want to know if this is like landing.
Is it resonating? Is it useful? Yeah.
So I started actually and plus I had all these colleagues who knew I was writing this book, and they're like, I need your book. Can you get it faster? And I said, no, I'm trying, but I can tell you about it. And so I just convened a series of sessions where I told people, at first, just a very small group of colleagues, this is what I'm, these are the things that I'm putting together. This is what I'm finding. These research studies seem to support this. And it was through their questions that I refined my own thinking about what I was writing.
I see.
And so the course and the book kind of developed hand in hand. They do not exactly mirror one another. And one of the things that I can do in the program that I can't do on the page is actually walk people through embodied practices, right? It just doesn't lend itself to the page very, very well. I have a ton of books, again, behind me on the shelf that write out various practices. You can't.
Yeah. I know that.
Right.
They're always in a different color, those exercise sections.
Yeah.
Some of the better books, they tell you, seriously, stop right now and actually do this,
Right. And look, no shade, because it helps to have those things written down and helps to see it on the page. But it's a whole different experience to be in community with people where you're all trying it on at once. You can talk about it. You can ask questions. Yeah. So the course has a lot more of that. But the course has actually been in a little bit of a hibernation state the last couple of years. I'm working on a number of updates to it, because when I originally put the course together, that was more than 10 years ago, right? And there's new research, there's new learning, there are things that I wrote in the book that never got included in the course. There are things that are in the course that were never in the book, right? So I'm currently in the process of updating that program, and it's going to look a little different in the future, and go more in depth in some areas, and some of the things that you can easily get from the book, I might just direct people to the book, right? The part of the course is read this chapter, watch this video, we'll come talk about it. So, okay, so you asked nuts and bolts details. I'll tell you what it was. It was a 6-month program where we meet every 2 weeks, and in the off weeks, you're studying something. So there is something to read, watch, or learn. Mm-hmm. And then in the weeks where we meet, we come together as a community for practice and question and answer. And all of that's virtual. It's actually always been taught virtually. Mm-hmm. And power user of Zoom back in 2015 or 16 or something, right? I don't remember when I started using Zoom, but way pre-pandemic. Yeah. And I think I've really enjoyed bringing people together to explore this territory together. Yeah. The way the course will probably look going forward is that there will be certain parts of it that really lend themselves well to self-study that will be carved out for people to do on their own, because one of the things that has been really tough is to have people come to me and be like, I want to take your course. And I'm like, great, it'll be ready again in a year. I run it once a year, so people have to wait and wait. So I've really been asked over and over, like, can you make something that I can just at least start with right now while I'm hungry for this?
Sure.
So I'm developing that, and then there'll be another piece of the course that's probably always taught some in some relationship with me, and it will evolve. So stay tuned. And for anyone who's listening and going, oh, I'm interested in that, stay tuned. Come over to the Embright website, sign yourself up, and say, I want to know when the updates are ready. So
yeah. Very cool. Well, okay. So let's I want to hear about your doctoral research because you gave me the teaser version when we did our prep meeting. And since then that was, maybe a month ago, I've been thinking about that. So I'm hungry to hear a little bit more. So could you, if you're ready to pivot, could we talk about what you ended up studying in your research and dissertation? Tell us about it, and then I want to talk about your findings, so to speak. So yeah.
Sure. Okay, great. It's really, Alex, it's not even that much of a pivot, because when I met Richard and he was like, come study with me, the whole conversation was, I have all the theoretical lens, right? That your body is your brain. I laid out the theoretical case for the idea that your body is your brain, that you actually think with your whole self. And what I didn't have was empirical data that said everything I wrote about is solid. So I made the extremely risky move, which at times resulted in like a lot of hair pulling, and one very scary night where I got the statistics completely backwards. And I was like, wow, I just tanked my whole career through bad math, which is actually my my downfall. Bad math almost tanked my whole career. Then I got some help from someone who understands statistics better than I do. And he was
good.
Oh, you did this backwards. Like, if you turn it around and do it the right way.
They're perfectly correlated. Yeah.
Now, actually, not only are they perfectly correlated, they're incredibly strong results. And even though I went into the program, so I feel really strongly like having a scientific mindset means having an open mind, having intellectual humility, being willing to be challenged, being willing to overturn, being willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
To be wrong publicly and to overturn what you've said before.
Yeah.
And so I went into this program, and I frankly really laid my whole career on the line. And it was this it was a scary thing to do, and it turns out a very empowering thing to do, because in the end, the results actually astonished even me. And I went in, with an open mind, but with a point of view. I had just written a whole book. Like, I had an idea about what was going on.
Sure.
So let me just cut to the chase, tell you some results.
Mm-hmm. Well, but also how you framed it, because or kind of like the question that you asked. I think, didn't you sort of, you defined the term embodied self-awareness.
Yeah.
That was so yeah. Lay out kind of the structure of the question that was being posed.
Well, there were multiple questions because I actually conducted multiple studies.
Okay.
So I actually started with people may have heard of grounded theory research because people will be familiar with Brené Brown. That's the kind of research she does. I didn't quite do grounded theory, but a very similar related method where I was just talking to people who had either experienced a lot of in-depth embodied training or who hadn't. And all of these people were coaches. And the reason I chose to look at coaches, apart from the fact that I'm a coach and I have access to that community of people, we talked about looking at a number of different possible populations. And I ultimately felt like it was most interesting to look at coaches because there's a large population of coaches that have been trained in conversational methods of coaching.
Right.
They don't have any experiential or embodied training at all.
Yep.
And there's also a fairly substantial population of coaches that have been trained in embodied methods. And that made it possible for me to compare in a way that's basically apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. Like, if I had done let's compare leaders to yoga teachers, that's not actually going to tell us anything that useful.
Yep.
So these people all had something really important in common, but they had one major difference, which was in their training. And so I started by talking to people. I just asked a lot of open-ended questions. And there I was just trying to understand the relationship between embodied self-awareness and some of these common emotional and social intelligence competencies.
Right.
And then I took what I learned from that research and I turned it into a survey where I could ask a much more pointed set of questions. So in the first case, very open-ended questions. In the second case, using very specific, very well-validated scales and measures, things like resilience, embodied self-awareness, capacity for flourishing and thriving, ways of managing conflict, right? All of these are not scales that I developed, but research tools that other researchers have developed that I kind of pulled together and said, okay, if we could get a bunch of coaches similarly to answer these questions and then statistically divide it up between how did the folks that have conversational coach training answer, how did the folks that have body-oriented coach training answer, what does that tell us?
Yeah.
So in that case, I was looking actually for two different things. I was looking for, do we have any evidence? Is there any reasonable correlation between the development of embodied self-awareness and the development of these emotional and social
emergent emotional, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And I was really looking to put points on the board statistically that would tell us yes to this, no to that, and so on. And then I was also asking another question, which is, what actually develops embodied self-awareness? Because there's so many ways that we can go about this.
Right.
And we can do hands-on body work. We can do psychotherapy. We can do, there are lots of like dance modalities.
Yoga, dance, martial arts.
Arts, meditation. So I studied a number of those things alongside what is the impact of body-oriented coaching. Okay, so let's talk about results.
Yep.
We had over 500, I think ultimately about 700 coaches respond to the survey. So that's a pretty decent sample size.
Sure.
Not enormous, but way bigger than small. And the ultimate outcome of looking across, I think we had to throw away some incomplete answers, but we had maybe 500 to 600 people total that we were looking at. And we saw that as embodied self-awareness grew, as embodied self-awareness rose, there were intra and interpersonal competencies that came along with that.
Okay.
Inside the self, we saw flourishing grow. We saw resilience and adaptability grow. So these are just personal competencies. Flourishing is not an emotional and social intelligence competency, but it's something that I've seen over and over in my practice, and it came up a lot in the more open-ended research.
I see.
Included that.
Yep.
All of those things grow at above a 45% rate. And just to give you an idea, like an average effect size in social psychology and psychology in general is around 20%. Right? That you'd be doing well if you saw 20%.
20% change. Yeah.
So these are really big correlations, big effect size. You grow embodied self-awareness, you grow a bunch of internal capacities. And we think by extension that a number of other emotional and social intelligence capacities come along.
In addition. Yeah.
The relational, the interpersonal outcomes. There were 3 specific things that I studied: empathy, connectedness, and conflict management. Again, all of those came along with growth in embodied self-awareness. Connectedness was the lowest. That was at about 20%. You double your embodied self-awareness, maybe 20% more connectedness. I actually think that's a function, that lower number is a function of the measure we use. So I'm interested to redo that and explore that a little more deeply. But again, empathy and conflict management both grew at rates of about 35-40%. So again, really high. So pretty unusually strong results.
Right.
Unusually strong results. Then the other thing that we found that was something that I a little bit suspected based on my own experience, but still was wildly surprised by the numbers and the magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking at in research terms, what are the antecedents to embodied self-awareness?
Okay.
What produces it?
Right.
We looked at mindfulness. We looked at yoga. We looked at martial arts. We looked at hands-on body work. We looked at dance. And we looked at embodied coaching.
Okay.
The only three of those that had an effect were mindfulness, yoga, and body work. And they were all right in the same range. They were all just about at a 4% relationship, meaning you do yoga and average levels of practice. Let's say you go to a yoga class a week. This is different maybe from being a yoga teacher, although we had some of those people in the study. Average levels of practice, 1 yoga class a week, maybe 2 yoga classes a week.
Yeah.
You'll boost your embodied self-awareness by about 4%.
Okay. Yep.
Not nothing.
Right.
And there are a lot of confounding factors that will affect our capacity for embodied self-awareness.
Sure.
Genetics, culture, what culture you come from, but lots and lots and lots of things. Right. So it's not bad, actually, 4%. And of course, we know there's like tons of research about mindfulness, about yoga, about the very significant effects, positive effects that those kinds of practices have. So if you do that, keep doing that. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
In terms of effects on embodied self-awareness, in other words, your ability to, in the present moment, while you're doing something else, pay non-judgmental attention to sensation, movement, and emotion.
Right.
Body-oriented coaching blew the others out of the water. It was 4 times as much. So we wound up now there's a threshold there, which is you actually need to be in it for a while. You need to put yourself into like a minimum of 50 hours of training. Well, that's maybe a week long workshop, right? But you put yourself into a minimum of 50 hours of training, and all of a sudden at that point, there's a threshold where you start to see 12%, 13%, 14%, 15% impact on growing embodied self-awareness. And the trajectory continues to go up the more time you spend in that kind of learning and practice.
Yeah.
And surely that's true as well, although we didn't see it as much in the other elements that, the other practices that we studied, that like if you went really deep and really long, you would get more of an effect.
Sure.
It kind of makes sense that would be true.
Right.
The reason I speculate, and this is a hypothesis, it's not something that we have legs for yet. I would hypothesize that the reason the body-oriented coach training or body-oriented coaching is so powerfully effective at developing embodied self-awareness is because it's contextualized. So in the West, in a really deliberate and I think wise attempt to make some of these very valuable practices that come from the Eastern world more palatable for the Western system to kind of digest, they were extracted from their deep spiritual context, right? Deep lineages of this is about how you become a better person.
Right.
Right. And it became much more in a Western context about performance or about relaxation right. It really kind of took on a little bit of a different flavor. Body-oriented coaching will keep that contextualization and amplify it because fundamentally coaching is about how do you be the person you want to be in your life? How do you get what you want to get out of life? How do you, if it's relationship coaching or career coaching or health coaching or parenting coaching, right? All of it is fundamentally about like, how do I get better about the things that matter to me in my life?
Right.
And so if that's your starting point and you bring experiential embodied learning into that, it makes sense that if you're doing that in a way that helps you shift your attention to sensation, movement, and emotion, there'll be a bigger impact. And then consequently a bigger impact on all of those outcomes that I spoke about, like flourishing and resilience and conflict management and so on.
Yeah. No, I love that. To me, your that explanation really resonates with me. Both as a somatic coach, but also somebody who's done a lot of those other practices as well, meditation and martial arts, and to me, it's really so that explanation rings true in the sense of, let's say you develop some highly refined application of embodiment in a specific context. Let's say, could be anything, could be martial arts, but it could be basketball, it could be swimming. It could be, doing certain yoga poses. And so through training, you might well develop, much higher degree of capacity in that particular activity. But unless there's some work to, bridging between, okay, well, so you're, what happens when you're in like what we talk about in Zen leadership training, in Jenny's work, we talk a little bit about the concept of kamai. Kamai is readiness, is a readiness posture. Well, all right. So if you just do martial arts and you learn kamai or you learn readiness, probably you learn it pretty well the more experience that you have in that situation. But unless there's some context around, is there something within that can also apply when you're conversing with your spouse, when you're at a job interview or conducting a job interview, then the skill in the one domain easily might not transfer. You are in your other habits when you're in a work setting or something like that. And so that your explanation makes a lot of sense to me, because a coaching environment is really all about building self-awareness, not only embodied self-awareness, although that is excellent, but then the self-awareness to, all right, how is that relevant? Where else might that show up? What are some areas where that's not showing up? Why isn't it? What would make that be able to, what would move the needle on that? So I kind of wonder if that explicit contextualization is exactly what gives it that higher efficacy that you're talking about.
I strongly suspect that's the case. And like I said, I mean, I think more research needs to be done before I feel like I put a pin in that, but I strongly suspect that's the case. And I would say, like, so much of my work has to do with helping people find a place in their life where, I can just think of a variety of qualities that clients have come to me wanting more of. Well, I want to be more visible at work, or I want to feel more confident I'm experiencing some imposter syndrome, or I want to be able to set boundaries, or I want to have more delight in my life, or I want to experience more ease. All of these things, right? Like 90% of what I do, I don't know if that's true. I pulled that number out of thin air. Right. But like, it just feels like the vast majority of what I do is help people go, well, where in your life do you have ease or confidence or patience or joy?
Yeah.
What does that feel like? What's the experience of that? Okay, how do you apply that experience? How do you bring that experience? How do you practice a posture of joy, a facial expression of joy, of the breath of joy, or of ease, or of confidence? And how do you practice that when you don't need it? And then you get up on the stage and you're speaking to 5,000 people, and that confidence is there. It's available to you. It is embodied. It is something that is easily accessible to you. It emanates from you. It is what you are being. When we look at the definition of what does it mean to embody, it's an expression of, or a characteristic expression of, or a tangible manifestation of. That's what it means to embody. So how do we become the tangible manifestation of ease,
compassion, connectedness,
right? Yeah. And so much of what I do is helping people find, I do have that experience somewhere in my life over here. I know what that feels like. Let me practice until it becomes second nature for this other domain where it's not very available to me.
Yeah.
Yet. Not very available to me yet.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can see, I mean, maybe I hope for people who've hung with us and listened to this far, you can start to hear like how I said at the outset, like this was life-changing for me, and I think it can be life-changing for other people. Well, that's how.
Totally. All right. I just have one question. This is maybe listeners already understood this, but I don't. So just coming back to your 500 to 700 people sort of sample. So I love hearing how you set that up. And then, you looked at those measures and it sounds like what you correlated was that people who had developed, you kind of measured in some way the development of the increase of embodied self-awareness, and then showed that with an increases of embodied self-awareness, there are increases of these across these other metrics as well. But my question is, so is the reason you chose coaches that had embodiment and ones that had not had embodiment training? Was your study providing the somatic coaching that was leading to the increase in embodied self-awareness? Or were you just looking at two groups and you were sort of evaluating to what extent they had already cultivated that embodied self-awareness or not through their, Yeah.
It was not an intervention study. It was a survey study.
Yeah.
And so, no, some of those people are people who have been through my particular courses. They may also have done other things. And we measured like, where did you get your primary coach training? How much time did you spend?
Yep.
How would you rate the level of kind of conceptual to embodied orientation of that training? So we looked very carefully at where people had already been trained, and some of them had been trained with me. But the purpose was not to measure
a particular style of intervention.
No, I actually really wanted to stay away from a particular style of intervention because I don't think that's as generalizable to wider options.
Yeah.
Right. So if we understand what is it that produces embodied self-awareness, well, probably it has something to do with contextualizing and rooting this embodied experiential behavioral learning in what you care about and where you want to go in life.
Right.
Like we think that's what does it. That's much more powerful than saying, well, you have to go study with this one,
Right. You got to do this. You got to do this technique. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are many, many places where, as you know, right, and as your listeners will know, where you can develop these skills and go to the one that draws you. We don't all taste flavors the same. We don't all see color the same.
Yeah, we don't all see color the same. That's right.
Like, you got to go to the place that really draws you. So
that's wonderful. Okay, well, I want to end our conversation if you still have energy for it. Just to ask a question I often do at the end, which is a little bit like, you've talked about, what's where you kind of up to the present tense and what's alive, and I'm always curious about, so where are you headed? What's next? What's kind of coming down the pipeline? Just curious if there's anything you can share about upcoming aspirations or intentions or anything like that.
Yeah, let me share things that I know I can deliver on and things that are more aspirational.
Right.
So one of the things that I'm working on that I'm actually super excited about and have had a wonderful group of people helping me test this over the last 9 months or so. I'm writing another book that is a companion to Your Body is Your Brain. And it's fundamentally about kind of a customizable template where you can develop your own practice. In a sense, it's a little bit codifying some of what I do in my coaching practice and making it, again, like more accessible to someone who can just off the shelf do something. It is not what we were talking about before, which is like, do step 1 and then step 2 and then step 3 and then come back, and like move your arm like this and then come back to the page and read what you're supposed to do next.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah.
It really is much more about finding the quality that's going to make the biggest difference in your life: confidence, patience, compassion, joy, etc.
Yep.
And just discovering a variety of ways that you can practice that in an embodied way. So anyway, it's the practice companion to your body is your brain. I'm super excited about it. I'm really excited to share the whole thing. It probably won't be ready for another year or two, so people's interest is piqued. Stick around.
Yeah. Great.
Also coming down the pike in a much more aspirational way and much less clear about a specific, like, what's going to come out of this. When I founded Embodied, when I started even my original coaching practice, I was mostly interested in working with leaders who were working in ecological and social change spaces, trying to build a better world, right? And there's the entire framework of the book, Your Body is Your Brain, is built around the idea of becoming your best self in order that you might build a better world. And I'm in a transition point, sort of having finalized my PhD. I'm now working on this companion book, but I'm also transitioning from having really focused a lot on the become your best self part and wanting to focus more and finding my own interest, energy, curiosity drawn a lot more into the build a better world part. And like, what are some of the very specific ways that embodiment has a contribution to make, and embodied leadership development has a contribution to make to people who are working, for example, to mitigate climate change, to work on conservation and biodiversity, to work in depolarizing the very sort of vituperous and hateful conversations that we seem to be in as a society. There are some really important things. These are not the only important things that the world needs, but really important things that I particularly am drawn to, that I am rooted in from way back in my undergraduate education, that have themes for me in my life that haven't gotten their fullest expression yet. And so I've got a lot of ideas cooking and some writing going on and scheming in the background. I'm really excited to play more in that space as time goes on.
Nice. I'm glad to hear about that. Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good place for completion in terms of I guess maybe a closing comment, or I guess closing update. You mentioned at the beginning that I think, is it the audiobook version of Your Body's Your Brain that either just came out or is about to come out, or what's the story there?
It came out several months ago, maybe about 6 months ago or so now.
Okay.
And I'm so proud of it. My sister-in-law is an award-winning voiceover artist. She read the book, cool. And she did such a good job that I wrote the book, have read the book approximately 17 million times, and frankly, am so bored of all those words. Like, I've seen them pass in front of my eyes times than I care to count. And I listened to her read it because, of course, I had to do all the editing.
Right.
And first of all, she did a fantastic job. There wasn't much editing. But I was riveted. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Like, I was actively listening, and I didn't expect that because, if you haven't written a book, you don't know this world, but you get to a point where you're no longer doing the big picture idea, that you are literally pulling grass with tweezers.
Right.
So I've been in it at that level of depth. And even so, she was able to make it come alive for me.
Yeah.
I love the audiobook. I'm so happy and proud, and I love that I got to collaborate with her on it. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. Was there anything else we should include just in terms of closing comments?
Just if there are people who, absolutely check out the book, but if you want to find me in my online home, that's embright.org. So EMBRIGHT.org. Sometimes I spell that so fast, I don't even know what I'm saying. Embrighten yourself.
Brighten your world.
Yeah.
And we'll put that, we'll put all the various links in the show notes in the various places that this podcast goes out. But Mandy, thank you so much. This was a rich and wonderful conversation.
Yeah, Alex, thank you for inviting me on. This has been a blast. Really, really enjoyed reconnecting with you, and also just appreciate your your depth and your humor and the questions that you ask. So thank you. This is really fun.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.